Have you ever noticed how some families treat silence as love? Mine did. And when my father dragged me into court to publicly disown me in front of 300 strangers, he thought that silence would protect him forever. He was wrong, because I had a secret that would destroy everything he'd built, and I was finally ready to use it. Have you ever noticed how some families treat silence as love? Mine did. And when my father dragged me into court to publicly disown me in front of 300 strangers, he thought that silence would protect him forever. He was wrong. Because I had a secret that would destroy everything he'd built, and I was finally ready to use it. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, this story will hit you right in the heart. Smash that like button if you believe the truth always finds a way, and subscribe, because we're about to witness the most devastating courtroom revenge you'll ever hear. My name is Jennifer, and for 24 years, I lived as a ghost in my own home. My father, Edward Sutton, was a man who loved appearances more than people. Our house was all white walls and spotless floors, a place where nothing lived except expectations. Every surface gleamed, every corner was perfect, and every imperfection was swiftly erased, including me. I grew up learning to make myself small, to fold into the spaces between his ambitions and his image. When I came home with honor roll ribbons in elementary school, they went straight into a drawer. When my brother Ryan brought home a mediocre basketball trophy, Dad cleared a whole shelf for it in the living room where everyone could see. He liked victories he could show guests. He liked sons who looked like him, who played sports, who fit the mold of what a Sutton should be. Me? I was the daughter who stayed late at the library, who loved books more than banquets, who preferred quiet corners to crowded rooms. I was the one whose achievements were academic, whose victories were private, whose very existence seemed to embarrass him at dinner parties. Jennifer's very studious, he'd say to guests, the word dripping with disappointment, as if intelligence was a character flaw he couldn't quite forgive. And while my mother Amanda tried to shield me, she was quiet too, her voice always one step behind his, her opinions always secondary to his desires. She'd slip into my room at night sometimes, smoothing my hair and whispering apologies for things she couldn't change. The last real conversation I had with her was on a rainy October night when I was 15. I'd just overheard Dad telling someone on the phone that Ryan was everything a father could want in a son, followed by a long pause and then, well, Jennifer's different. I don't remember anything after. I was crying when Amanda found me in the kitchen, and for once, she didn't try to make excuses for him. "Don't waste your life begging for his approval, Jennifer," she said, her voice barely above a whisper but more fierce than I'd ever heard it. "He'll never give it. Some people's love comes with conditions that can never be met." She died 2 years later in a car accident on her way home from visiting her sister. I never forgot those words, but I spent years trying to prove them wrong. Forgetting her was easy for him, though. Within 8 months, he remarried. Victoria was everything my mother wasn't: loud, confident, demanding attention. With her came new stepchildren, Nicholas and Carol, polished and eager to please, hungry for the approval I'd spent my life chasing. They filled the house with laughter that never reached me. My picture frames disappeared from the mantel, replaced by Victoria's family photos. My room was repurposed into a guest space when Nicholas needed somewhere to display his lacrosse trophies. I became a ghost in my own home, invited to family dinners but excluded from family conversations. And yet, I stayed. I stayed through college, staying local when I could have gone anywhere. I stayed through family holidays where I sat at the far end of the table, listening to Dad praise Nicholas's business internships and Carol's sorority achievements. I stayed because some desperate part of me still believed that one day, Edward Sutton would look at me and see his daughter. I was wrong about so many things, but I was especially wrong about that. The years after college were a special kind of torture. I'd gotten my degree in journalism, landed a job at a local newspaper, and even won a few regional awards for investigative reporting, but every achievement felt hollow when shared with a family that acted like I didn't exist. Christmas dinners became exercises in endurance. I'd watch Dad beam with pride as Nicholas talked about his real estate ventures, watch him hang on every word as Carol described her marketing job. When the conversation briefly turned to me, it was always perfunctory. "Jennifer's still at that little newspaper," Victoria would say with a tight smile, like she was describing a phase I'd eventually grow out of. The worst part wasn't the dismissal, it was the hope. Every birthday, every holiday, every family gathering, some foolish part of me thought maybe this time would be different. Maybe this would be the moment he'd finally see me, finally acknowledge that I was his daughter too, finally show even a fraction of the pride he lavished on my step-siblings. I remember one particularly brutal Thanksgiving when I was 23. I'd just broken a story about corruption in the city planning department, real investigative work that had taken months and resulted in 3 resignations. I thought maybe, finally, this was something he'd be proud of. "Dad, did you see the article I wrote? It's been picked up by the state paper and—" "That's nice, honey," he said without looking up from his conversation with Nicholas about property investments. "Nicholas, tell me more about that development project." I sat there, my words dying in my throat, watching him give my stepbrother the attention I'd been craving my entire life. Carol caught my expression and actually smirked, this cruel little smile that said she knew exactly how powerless I was. That night, I went home to my tiny apartment and cried until my chest ached. I called my best friend Ruth, who'd been telling me for years to stop torturing myself. "Jennifer, honey, when are you going to accept that some people are just incapable of loving the way you need them to?" she said gently. "Your worth isn't determined by his inability to see it." But I couldn't let go. Some part of me was still that little girl with the honor roll ribbons, convinced that if I just tried hard enough, if I just achieved enough, if I just became enough, he'd finally love me the way fathers are supposed to love their daughters. I was about to learn that sometimes the universe has other plans. When my grandfather George died at 87, I was devastated. He'd been the one bright spot in our family dynamics, the one person who'd always made me feel seen and valued. While Dad was busy grooming Nicholas as his heir apparent, Grandpa George would slip me books about famous journalists and tell me stories about his own father, who'd built the Sutton construction empire from nothing. "You've got the Sutton mind, Jennifer," he'd say during our quiet moments together. "Sharp, determined, fearless when it counts. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." The funeral was a grand affair, befitting a man who'd built a multi-million-dollar company. I sat in the front row with the family, but I might as well have been invisible. Dad gave a beautiful eulogy about legacy and honor and the Sutton name. Victoria dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Nicholas and Carol looked appropriately somber. But it was the reading of the will that changed everything. The lawyer, an elderly man named Jason who'd worked with our family for decades, cleared his throat and began reading. The house went to Dad, as expected. Various charitable donations were distributed. Some money went to Victoria's children. Then came the bombshell. "To my granddaughter Jennifer, who has shown integrity and independence throughout her life, I leave 1/3 of my remaining estate, including my shares in Sutton Construction and my personal investment portfolio." The silence in that room was deafening. I felt the air leave my lungs. Dad's face went completely white. Victoria's mouth actually fell open. Nicholas looked like he'd been slapped. 1/3 of the estate. That was nearly $2 million, plus controlling interest in the company. For the first time in my life, someone in that family had said, without words, "You matter." But my father couldn't allow it. The explosion came 3 days later. Dad stormed into my apartment without knocking, his face purple with rage. "How dare you?" he screamed. "What did you say to him? What lies did you tell him to poison him against his own family?" "I didn't." "Don't you dare lie to me. This is my father's company, my legacy. You think you can just waltz in and steal what belongs to Ryan, what belongs to Nicholas?" The irony wasn't lost on me that Ryan, my actual brother, wasn't even mentioned in the will, beyond a small trust fund. But Nicholas, the stepson, was apparently more deserving of the family legacy than I was. "Grandpa made his choice," I said quietly. "Maybe you should ask yourself why he made it." That's when he told me exactly what he thought of me, using words I won't repeat. But the gist was clear. I was an ungrateful, manipulative disappointment who'd somehow conned an old man into giving me money I didn't deserve. 2 weeks later, I got the court papers. He was contesting the will, claiming I'd been estranged from the family for years, that I'd abandoned my duties as a daughter, that I was mentally unstable and financially irresponsible. He didn't just want to erase me privately. He wanted to do it publicly, in front of a judge and a courtroom full of people. He wanted to make sure everyone knew that Jennifer Sutton was not and had never been worthy of the family name. The morning of the trial, I sat in my car outside the courthouse for 20 minutes, trying to work up the courage to go inside. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my coffee cup. This was it, the moment my father would try to destroy me in the most public way possible. I walked into that courtroom wearing my mother's black dress and carrying a manila folder that contained everything I needed to defend myself. The room was packed. Family friends filled the gallery, along with reporters and curious strangers drawn by the drama of a wealthy family tearing itself apart in public. Dad's legal team had clearly prepared for a spectacle. They'd brought character witnesses, financial experts, even a psychiatrist, who'd never met me but was prepared to testify about my emotional instability based on my father's descriptions. When Edward took the stand, he looked every inch the grieving son and concerned father. His voice was steady, his demeanor calm and reasonable. "Your Honor," he said, "my daughter Jennifer has been estranged from our family for years. She rarely attended family gatherings, showed little interest in family business, and has repeatedly rejected our attempts to include her in family decisions." Lies. All lies. But he delivered them with such conviction that I saw several jury members nodding along. "She turned her back on us years ago," he continued, his voice growing stronger. "She doesn't deserve my father's legacy. She's no longer my daughter." The words hit me like a physical blow. Around the courtroom, people gasped and murmured. I felt 300 pairs of eyes turned to look at me, the girl sitting alone, hands clenched in her lap, apparently abandoned by her own father. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I just waited. Because 3 months earlier, while cleaning out Amanda's belongings from storage, I'd found something that changed everything. Hidden in the back of an old trunk was a locked metal box I'd never seen before. When I finally got it open, I found documents Amanda had kept but never confronted him with. Financial statements, forged receipts, altered contracts, and a series of letters between my mother and grandfather that told a story no one else knew. The story of how Edward had been embezzling from Sutton Construction for over a decade. The story of how my mother had discovered it and threatened to expose him. The story of how I had unknowingly helped cover it up. When I was 19, Dad had come to me with what he called a family emergency. He needed a loan, he said, just temporary, to cover some unexpected business expenses while waiting for a client payment. $50,000 from my college fund. Money Grandpa George had set aside for my education. I'd given it to him without question, because that's what daughters do for their fathers. What I didn't know was that he'd been stealing from the company, and Grandpa George was closing in on the truth. My college money had gone to covering his tracks, at least temporarily. In that box was also a letter from Grandpa George, written just months before he died. "Jennifer, you saved this family once, though no one thanked you. Your father stole from the company I built, and your mother knew but stayed silent to protect you children. One day, this truth may be heavy enough to set you free. You are the only one with the integrity to carry our name forward. Don't let him destroy what we built." When it was my turn to respond, I rose slowly. My heart pounded against my ribs, but my voice was steady. "Your Honor," I said, "if my father wants this court to decide who carries the Sutton legacy, then the court deserves the full truth." I placed the documents on the judge's bench. The room went completely still. You could have heard a pin drop as the judge examined the papers. Bank statements showing transfers to offshore accounts, forged contracts, altered invoices, and, most damning of all, email communications between Edward and a shell company he'd created to funnel money out of Sutton Construction. Then the court reporter read aloud my grandfather's letter, the one that revealed my father's theft, my mother's silence, and my unwitting role in protecting what he would have destroyed. The reaction was immediate and devastating. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Reporters scribbled frantically. I watched my father's face collapse in real time as his carefully constructed image cracked wide open in front of 300 strangers. His reputation, the one he had spent his entire life curating, was being destroyed, piece by piece, with every word the court reporter spoke. "Lies," he roared, jumping to his feet. "She's making this up. She's unstable, Your Honor, you can see." But the documents were authenticated. The handwriting analysis confirmed Grandpa George's letter. The financial records were undeniable. The ruling was swift and brutal. Not only was the inheritance mine, but the judge ordered a full investigation into the financial irregularities at Sutton Construction. Edward left that courtroom in handcuffs, charged with embezzlement, fraud, and tax evasion. But the money wasn't the victory. The victory was the silence that followed. the silence of a man who had spent years talking over me, now choking on words he could never take back. I walked out of that courtroom lighter than I had ever been in my life. The reporters swarmed immediately, cameras flashing, microphones thrust in my face, questions shouted from every direction. "Miss Sutton, how does it feel to inherit your grandfather's fortune? Did you know about your father's crimes? What's next for Sutton Construction?" I said nothing. I walked through that crowd with my head held high, got in my car and drove home to my tiny apartment. That night, I sat on my couch with my mother's letter in my hands, reading it over and over. For the first time, I understood why she'd stayed silent, why she'd protected those secrets even when they were killing her. She'd been trying to save our family even from itself. I played an old voicemail I'd saved from her, just her voice saying, "I love you, Jennifer. Never forget that you are worthy of love exactly as you are." For the first time in my life, I believed it. The aftermath was swift and merciless. Edward's arrest made the front page of every newspaper in the state. Sutton Construction's stock price plummeted. Victoria filed for divorce within a week, taking Nicholas and Carol and disappearing from our lives as quickly as they'd entered. Ryan, my brother, reached out tentatively. He'd had no idea about Dad's crimes, and the revelation shattered his image of our father completely. We began the slow process of rebuilding a relationship that Dad's favoritism had damaged for years. "I'm sorry," he said during one of our awkward coffee meetings. "I always knew he treated you differently, but I never realized. I should have said something." "We were kids," I told him. "We both just wanted his love." The difference was, Ryan had gotten it. I'd spent my life begging for crumbs. As for Sutton Construction, I had a choice to make. I could sell my shares and walk away from the family business entirely. Or I could try to rebuild what my grandfather had created, and my father had nearly destroyed. I chose to fight. Working with the remaining board members, we restructured the company, implemented new oversight protocols, and slowly began winning back the trust we'd lost. It was hard work, harder than anything I'd ever done, but for the first time in my life, I felt like I was building something instead of just surviving something. 6 months later, I got a letter from Edward in prison. He wanted to reconcile, to explain his side of the story, to repair our relationship. I threw it away without reading past the first paragraph. My father had disowned me in front of 300 strangers, thinking that would be the end of my story. Instead, it became the beginning of the life I was meant to live. I didn't need his name. I had my own now. I didn't need his approval. I had something better. I had my mother's love, my grandfather's trust, and my own voice, the one he could never silence again. And in that moment, sitting in the office that was now mine, looking out at the city skyline, I finally understood what my mother had been trying to tell me all those years ago. Some people's love comes with conditions that can never be met, but the right people's love comes with no conditions at all. I was finally free to find out what that felt like. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't planning something elaborate, it's simply telling the truth when it matters most. If this story inspired you to stand up for yourself, smash that like button and tell me in the comments about a time when the truth set you free. Subscribe for more stories about justice, family drama, and the power of never giving up on yourself, because sometimes the people who try to silence you are just afraid of what you might say.